Being a gangster is not a title, it's the core fabric in which your existence relies upon. Being a gangster isn't a choice, it's something you're destined to be. Being a gangster is a frame of mind where honor and loyalty above all else. You see nothing, hear nothing, and you keep your mouth shut. That's what being a gangster is. And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
$60 fucking shootings. Motherfucker, you couldn't shoot yourself out of a fucking can, you prick. Hey, Charlie Lucky Luciano, huh? You hung out with Salvatore Luciano's brother, Chucky, Charlie, whatever the fuck. Jerk-offs. I just gotta say, the older I get, the more bullshit I hear, and the stupider shit gets. I've heard it all. I have heard it all, and not even into a reference to start shit. It's just where I come from and what I believe in. Like a lot of what I do. First of all, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jeff Canarsie. This is Mob Talk Radio. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not going to help you out there. But what I will tell you is this. What I try to do on this show is I'm honest, okay? That's number one, all right? Number two is I cover the history of organized crime. I've been at this game a long time. Not 10 years like some people say, but I've been at this a long time. And I just think that if you are going to do a mob-oriented show, you should know what the fuck you're talking about. I mean, that's really helpful to, every day, 10 shootings, 20 shootings, 30 shootings, 40 shootings. I mean, how many is it? Because reality is it's like 2. All right? 60. Fuck out of here. And that's really not what my contention is today. My contention is like, don't say stupid shit about Lucky Luciano trying to validate your bullshit, because reality is you didn't know him, you didn't know anybody. And let me give you a good reference point to this. So Lucky Luciano had 4 siblings. Giuseppe, Joe, who was born in 1898. Filippo, who was born in 1901. Concetta, who was born in like 1902 or some shit. And then you have Bartolomeo, who was born in 1890. Now, if you do the math right there, it doesn't even work out. Mathematically, it doesn't fucking work out. So stop believing the fucking nonsense and the lies and the bullshit. One of the things that I try to pride myself on in this show, and I don't always get it right. I get a lot of shit wrong, I'm going to be honest. And when I do, I'm pretty to the point about it. And I'll tell you what I said wrong, and then I'll correct myself. I don't always get it right. There's nothing called a mob expert. I don't give a fuck who you are. There's no such thing, because unless you're on the streets, unless you hear them comments, or you're a part of something, or you're privy to that information, you don't fucking know. So a lot of what I and other people do is we look at the facts, and we try to sort of assemble them in a palatable sense so that you can understand. Do I think I know more than anybody else? No. Do I have a better grip on the streets than a lot of people? Yeah. And that's because I've been there, done that to the extent. And when I say that, people always take that for granted, or they fucking take it as, oh, he's saying he was a gangster. I never said any of those things. But listen, I got to pass like everybody else. So it is what it is, and I just wish that more people would call people out on their bullshit and lies. I've seen a little bit going on this week. I'm a little happy with what I've been seeing because I think people are finally seeing it for what it is. It's a rotten fucking fish, as my grandfather used to say. It stinks in the fucking freezer, and that's the truth. And so, listen, I'm not getting on a tangent about it. I just think that if you're going to pay for something, then you should be being told the truth, and not listening to just rambling fucking nonsense that makes no sense. So that's just my 2 cents. I'm going to leave it there and move on. So what do we have? Today we are going to talk about the Bonanno Crime Family. I get a lot of questions all the time about, why the Bonannos lost a seat on the commission, why they've had so many problems, why are they looked down upon in a certain kind of respect. And we're going to talk about that because this just didn't start yesterday. This started back like in the 1940s, early 1950s. There's a lot of stuff that happened one after the other, which led the Bonannos to sort of going from the top tier family in many ways to a bottom tier family, and we're going to talk about that. We're also going to do a huge Q&A, and we are going to do a boss by boss cutting off at Nicky Scarfo, Philadelphia, the mob show. That is already done. I'm just waiting to put that out. I wanted to change a couple of things with it. So that will be coming out as well. So the other thing is here too, and I'm not going to get into a lot of details about this right now, but we are leaving YouTube official. It's done. We're leaving YouTube. We're going to be on a whole new platform. You'll be able to get it on your phone. I know a lot of people in Europe have complained that they haven't been able to get my show via YouTube because for some reason it's blocked in Europe. I don't understand why. Probably for the same reason why I'm banned in Finland. I have no fucking idea about that. But you'll be able to basically join the platform, go on your phone, and you can listen to it on any podcasting platform that you like. So if you're into, whatever Apple has, iTunes, whatever the fuck, you can get it there. A lot of people have said that I have talked to that know that this was coming. Says, well, I like to plug it into my TV. We'll get a smart TV if you want to pop it on your TV. I can't help you there. But a lot of the old shows will go on to the new platform. The YouTube channel will stay the same. That's not going to leave, and all the old shows will be there. We are going to go back and redo some of the shows. We do have some guests coming on. I think I probably, minus one guest that I thought I was going to have, probably isn't going to happen at this point. At least that's what I'm being led to believe. But I could be wrong. You never know. But I got 2 other guests that are already lined up. I just have to wait till we get to the new platform. They will be on the new platform. So this platform's pretty cool. It's not going to enable the haters to share the stuff at all. There's going to be some features that are put into it that just don't allow anybody to make a username and then give it to people. It's not going to be able. You're not going to be able to do it. So, and that was one of the big things I wanted. I wanted to make sure that if I did this, that I did it in a way where people just couldn't fucking just start pasting it everywhere. That's not what I wanted. I wanted general people to just come to the site. The blog is going to stay the same, probably look a little bit different, have a couple other features. But it's going to be basically the same show. There's going to be some slight differences. Same guy, same material. We are going to redo some episodes and go dig a little deeper. They're probably going to be, I would imagine right now, 4 to 5 shows a month. There are going to be some special features too, where people that do join the platform are going to get a link to a private YouTube page where they can join in a live show. They can do live question and answer. Also on this platform, you'll be able to submit questions right on that platform as well. So I don't know what that means for the Facebook page, but like I said, right now it's just the web page is done. Everything is done. A part of the I should not go into this, and I'm going to be very careful, but there were negotiations between me and 2 other companies about me going with them. One of them very famous. Well, both of them actually are very famous, but one is sort of a burgeoning company run by some big-time Hollywood people, but I just don't think that's the right route for me to go. right now. That's not to say that if 3 months or 4 months from now, if this person comes along again and says, hey, listen, I really want you to really reconsider or whatever, then I might. But until now, it's just been kind of a waiting game. And I says, nah, fuck it. Let me just go out on my own. Because from day one, I've always done this on my own. I don't pay for subscribers. I did this the hard way. A lot of people, they go out and they buy 50, 60,000 subs or followers. I didn't do any of that. I'm just old school about it. So probably I'm going to say like the middle of October, we're probably going to launch. I just have to do one or two little things to just set up the page is done, but I have to test it to make sure everything works well. But it's going to be very basic. You're gonna be able to log in and click the episode and listen away. I'm not doing Patreon or whatever that bullshit is. And here's the secret. A lot of people don't understand this, but with the subject material that I cover, because a lot of people say, why don't you go to Patreon and all of this shit? The reason why I don't is because my subject material and the things that I fucking say goes against all of their rules for taking donations. That's why I don't do it. So anybody that is trying to do that is going to have an awful fucking hard time doing that. If they're going to talk about the mob genre, because as much as people love listening to it, advertisers don't like advertising on it. It's just the reality of life. So I've just had to do everything the hard way. But in the next probably 2 weeks, I'll have more announcements on exactly the details for the new platform. I'm also going to have the luxury of denying people to join this platform, which is another great feature. This way I can sort of root out the shitbags and the troublemakers and the people that are sort of taking what my format is and using it, because a lot of people are doing that now. And listen, what I'm doing is not original as far as my format, but when I start to see them saying some of the things that I say, covering the things that I cover, then it's time to move on. And I think that's a big reason why I wanted to sort of get off YouTube. Hopefully people that are on YouTube jump over, and hopefully everybody else does. I don't know. Like I said earlier, I don't know what that's going to mean for the Facebook page. That may have to change a little bit, but for right now, it's all systems go. We're probably going to do another 3 shows after this, and then it'll change. But like I said, I've got to just get to the end of this month and just kind of do more testing on the page. And it's very basic. Click and play. Plug in your headphones, put it in your car, do whatever you want. So all that being said, we are going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get to your Q&A. I'm out of town a lot. Whether it's Philadelphia, it's New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, wherever the case may be, I'm always looking for a place where I can sit down and have a great dinner. Ambiance is key. Price is obviously key. But the most important thing is the food good? And there's a place I want to tell you about today. It's called Saltwater at Margate. If you are going down to the shore, because I know a lot of people in Philadelphia go to the shore, especially Margate, you're missing out on a great restaurant if you haven't been there. The name is Saltwater Margate. It's at 9401 Ventnor Avenue, Margate City, New Jersey. The phone number there is 609-289-8078. You can also visit them online at saltwatermargate.com. This place is unbelievable. Not only is the food absolutely superb, the price is great too. They're renowned for their pizza and their gnocchi. They have all kinds of different things, from mussels to roast pork and Italian fare. So do yourself a favor, do me a favor, go and visit Saltwater Margate. You will not be disappointed. It is a place that I think at some point, if not already, there's going to be lines out the door and around the block. So if you're down on the shore, stop in, go to Saltwater Margate. At least check them out online at saltwatermargate.com. I know at times we like to have a lot of fun on this show, but it's time to get serious about one thing. I know that the coronavirus pandemic has hurt a lot of my listeners and their businesses. Restaurants have been ordered to close, gyms have been ordered to close, cigar lounges have been ordered to close, and even bars have been ordered to close. These are small businesses that don't always have the cash reserves to continue making their rent or mortgage payments. They can't even pay their vendors. My good friend Mike Kaysen of Kaysen & Kaysen is an experienced bankruptcy lawyer that is there to help you right now. Kaysen & Kaysen represents individuals and small businesses in complex bankruptcy proceedings in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Miami. Give Mike a call at 646-389-3000 397-6226. And if you mention Mob Talk Radio, he's going to give you a free consultation. Once again, it's Mike Cason of Cason & Cason, 646-397-6226. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Canorsi, and we are going to start with the Q&A. A lot of people are still confused as to how to get their questions submitted, considering we took the tab off our Facebook page of send message. It was just too much. So the way you do it is you go on our Facebook page, Mob Talk Radio, and you will see on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday of every week, it'll say Q&A and go. That's where you submit your questions. That is the only way I can help you. I will accept them on Instagram too. But I will not allow you to follow me on Instagram if I don't know who you are either. I like to keep things nice and sort of tidy and clean, and so that's how we do that. So all that being said, if I don't answer your questions, once again, it's because I've answered it either a million times or it just takes too long to answer. So all that being said, the first question I got is, Jeff, you've been doing this a long time. What is the biggest single regret, if you had one, about the show, or what issues are caused because of it? I think the biggest thing, at least I think in the last couple months, is I find myself sort of in the crosshairs of some things. There are some things that I should pay attention to, and some things that I definitely shouldn't pay attention to. One of my big problems is that I like to help my friends, and when I say friends, I mean friends. This isn't like some fucking ranting delusion on my behalf. I think sometimes, because I'm so passionate about defending my friends, that I don't think things all the way through. And that's on me. I can admit that that's a flaw that I have. Sometimes, listen, are some things more important than others? Yes. But the second that I stop defending my friends, or the second that I allow shit to continue when I do have some control over it, and that's the interesting feature about having a show like this, is that I can control my narrative. That's number one. I cannot control anybody else's narrative, but what I can do is put a stop to the nonsense and bullshit and lies. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's bad. I certainly don't like to put my nose in the middle of drama. Some people might think I enjoy that shit. That's not what I try to do, but oftentimes I find myself sort of in the middle of that. So that's the biggest thing. I don't regret helping people. I don't regret standing up for my friends, but I think that you got to pick your spots, right? And I think sometimes I've picked my spots very terribly. And I can admit that, and I have, no problem admitting that, but I think that sometimes, can I go too far? Sure, absolutely. Sometimes do I not go far enough? Sure. I don't think that I have to involve myself in every little thing I disagree with. And I think a lot of people think that that's how I sort of operate. And that's not my intention. It just sort of comes off that way sometimes. So if there's anything I regret, it's putting myself in a situation to be the bearer of bad news is never fucking fun. It's never fun. It's nerve-wracking. It's not a fear thing. It's just who wants to fucking call somebody and say, hey, listen, nobody wants to do that. And nobody wants to get shot as a messenger. I'm not saying I've been shot as a messenger. I'm just saying that sometimes, people have a long memory. And I haven't always been fair with people. I'm the first to admit that. There were some things that I said about somebody a couple years ago that wasn't fair. It wasn't fair, and I was wrong, and I was out of line, and I probably, well, not probably, I said some things that were inaccurate, and I knew they were inaccurate. And who knows why I do what I do sometimes, but one thing that I have really tried hard to do the last year is just be straight up about everything. And not everybody's going to like me either. I am an acquired taste. That's what my father used to say about me. My mother used to say it about me. So I'm going to say it. I'm an acquired taste. You either love me or you hate me, and that's just the way it is. So that's probably been, the biggest regret. I could take the threats, I could take the harassment, I could take all of that. I pride myself on being a stand-up person, being loyal to people around me, and if I quit doing that, then I've really sort of lost who I am. And how I sort of gauge how far whether I've gone too far or not is by whether I've hurt somebody, upset somebody emotionally. I don't like to do that. Listen, I just call a spade a spade. I have an opinion. It's not for everybody, but there's this magical thing called a fucking volume knob. And if you don't like it, turn it the fuck off. Nobody has to listen to me, So, all right. In the old days, there were some guys who operated independently. Most of them never had any problems, but a few did. Is there anybody or any crews operating independently these days? And if so, let's say they're not kicking up, like with what happened with Harry Riccobaney. What would be the end result? I know times have changed, but Scarfo wouldn't tolerate it, so why would any other boss in any other city tolerate it? Ooh, so, oh boy. So what I can say is, and I'm going to be careful how I say this, I think there's probably people that do operate independently. I think the reality of not kicking up isn't true. I don't think, and I could be totally wrong about this, and granted, times have fucking changed, but I do not think that there is anyone anywhere doing anything where they're not at least kicking up. Not kicking up will get you killed pretty quick. You could be independent all day long, but if you're not kicking up and feeding the horse, you're going to get kicked. And that's just the reality. Now, have I heard there could be maybe quite possibly a situation where that is going on? I hear whispers. Of course I hear whispers. For some reason, people tell me shit. In different states, different cities, different towns, I've got people with their ears on the ground, and they call me and they tell me things. And these are people, when people call me, and this is what I want everybody to understand, these aren't just knuckleheads that call me. Some of these people are serious individuals. Some of them aren't. Some of them just know people. They know the situation. They're loosely associated with the situation. And so I know I'm not being very specific, and I'm not going to be very specific about this, because the thing is, if I go out and I try to be specific about this, I'm going to get in trouble. And that's the reality. I'm just being honest. The information that I may or may not know could just be gossip. I don't believe in this particular thing that I'm thinking about that it is. I think it's probably closer to reality. And so I can't really honestly answer to you why anybody would tolerate nobody kicking up. People have been independent forever, right? So that's nothing new. But the idea that somebody is operating and not kicking up or refusing to me, that's mind-blowing. And I don't know what the accuracy is of what I've been hearing. Listen, I don't call these people on the phone. They call me and they say, "Oh, did you hear?" And, in certain places, even here in New York, gossip is gossip. And I really don't report gossip. That's not what I'm into. So I don't know how accurate the information is, but it's just something that I don't really divulge, or I don't really think a lot of, only because, A, it's none of my fucking business. That's number one. And number two, that's the kind of information that gets people fucking shot. Right there. So I'm not going to put myself on the ledge and go, go ahead, you might as well just fucking push me off. I got nothing to live for. So I'm sure it's happening somewhere, but I just don't think the reality is somebody's just going to say, fuck you, I'm not paying shit. And then on top of that, I'm going to do what I want. If that is technically happening, I don't understand why it is. Because back in the old days, that type of shit got you shot or you disappeared. So I'm sure it happens. But I can't really get specific with you either, because a lot of things that I hear, I can check on, but I'm not going to make a call to somebody and say, "Hey, did you hear this, that, and I'm just not going to do that. That's like drama. It's gossip. And that's the kind of shit that gets a motherfucker hurt, and so I'm not about putting myself in those situations. All right. For each of the 5 families, which was the best boss in your opinion? that each family ever had. Well, you're going to try to put me in a jam here with this one. Historically speaking, I'm pretty much all over the board. Look, listen, if I ignore a name here or there, somebody's going to take umbrance with me. They're going to say, oh, well, this is not what you said last week or the week before. So let me just try my best. I think the best boss of the Genovese crime family was Vincent the Chin Gigante. And, I think Tony Salerno's a close second. I really couldn't just name one there. For the Gambinos, obviously, it doesn't get any better than Carlo Gambino. For the Colombos, Carmine Persico. He was a good guy. He was a gentleman from my experience. Really good guy. The Bonannos are always a heel for me, and you're going to find out why today. But probably Vinny Basciano. As far as the Lucchese's, I don't think it gets any better than Tommy Lucchese. I mean, Tony Ducks would be a number 2. So there you go. All right. Let's see. The Genovese crime family is known as the Ivy League. Why do they say that? And why do they say the Gambinos are the most powerful? Is it okay to say that the Colombos would have been the most ruthless and the Bonannos would have been the most careless? Do you think the Lucchese's were the most treacherous? Yeah, I think you're pretty much right on the ball there. A lot of the times the people call it the Ivy League. It's just how the family is run. Not a lot of rats, not a lot of talking, a lot of quietness, just keep it moving forward, making money. That's probably why they get that role. I think the Gambinos, we get the most powerful thing only because of the ties that they have in Sicily, that they had to Toto Rina and the Inzerillos and that John Gambino, and it just, et cetera. Frank Cali just goes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Columbus definitely did not fuck around for 1 second. The Lucchese's were definitely treacherous. So I think your list is pretty accurate as far as I'm concerned. All right. Do you think one of the reasons why Montana was never killed was because he was a politician? Regardless of whether he was corrupt or not, it would have brought unnecessary attention. I think the reality is he was too valuable for them to lose. And I think ultimately they allowed him to do what he wanted. Because of that fact. If you take away Appalachian and that whole fucking nonsense, he never sort of gets found out to be the consigliere of the crime family. But after Appalachian, his career was done anyway. So from that point of view, I understand your question, but he helped the mob more than he hurt them to a certain point. Once he gets caught in Appalachian, that's over with. Now, had he done something and brought massive heat on the crime family, like in investigations and Senate committee hearings and all of that, then I think you probably would have, they probably would have killed him. I don't have any doubt about that. But because he was not responsible for all the heat that came on that family, I think the reason why they let it slide was because there were benefits. There was money to it. There was power, prestige, and politics. All right, who did the Cherry Hill Gambinos ultimately answer to, New York or Sicily? New York. That's who they answered to, 100%. All right, Chaz Palminteri said that A Bronx Tale was loosely based off his life, and he was a young C who witnessed the murder. If that's true, which family was portrayed, and who was Sonny supposed to be? And then he gives a reference point to I guess, an interview that Chaz did. This has been a wide argument for a long time now. A lot of people, argue validity about what he said because his story has changed a lot. And, frankly, I don't know enough about him or about the situation to really give you a name, a place, and a time period. But like I said, you just have to look at the time period and see who was the top guy. I can definitely tell you that Chaz wasn't a mobster. He knew a lot of those guys. I'm not sure specifically the exact murder he is talking about. I mean, at least historically speaking. Do I doubt the validity? No, I've got no reason to doubt the guy whatsoever. I know a lot of other people do, but that's on them. So I think, obviously if it's taking place in the Bronx, it doesn't take a whole lot of math to kind of figure out which crime family, would have been involved in that. But just because it's a certain territory doesn't mean it was them either. So that would be a question I would love to ask him myself. All right, what's good, Jeff? I've been listening to the show for a little while. I know you did a show on Carlos Marcello and was wondering if you're ever going to do an in-depth show on his underboss, his consiglieres, his capos, his soldatos, and the real guys that ran the day-to-day operations. By the way, great show. I hope that everything is working out with your TV series, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, one of the things I said at the top of the show was I am planning on redoing a lot of the shows and getting a little more in depth. The thing is when I first started, I wanted the show to mainly just like be an hour. I mean, and here we are now at 2.5 hours plus each week. So yeah, definitely at some point I'd like to do like a entomology of a crime family from the beginning to where we are at currently. But I just have to flesh it out as far as how far I want to go, who I want to include, because there's a lot of stuff, because it's like a trail. You know, you look at Salvatore Sabella down in Philadelphia, and then Sabella leads to this one, to Avena, and then from Avena to Bruno, and it just, you know, you just go down a fucking rabbit trail. So you have to figure out who, and the Lanzetti brothers, my God, nobody talks about them. They were fucking animals in South Philadelphia. But yeah, we're definitely going to redo some of the shows. Absolutely. And we're going to do a more in-depth show on Carlos Marcello and include a lot of the CIA stuff and government stuff too. Have you read the book Anthony's Boy, The Prince of Bath Avenue? It seems like bullshit to me. I never heard of Joey Calco, but from what I understand, he wasn't a made guy, yet he got all this power and respect from Anthony Spiro and other made guys in the Bonanno crime family. It makes out like he was one of the most feared guys on the streets. Nevertheless, the book was okay, but I'm not sure how real it is. Listen, Joey Calco was a nut job, loose cannon, and he was a tough guy. But that's where sort of the street legend sort of begins with him. You know, he ended up becoming a rat. You know, he got a nice name. Thank you to the federal government. He called himself Joe Milano. He ends up going down to Florida. The feds front him cash to start his own pizza business, and he ends up pistol whipping the shit out of his own customers who wanted their money back. You know, so, you know, as you see, the guy won't hesitate to kill or hurt people in the streets. I mean, like it or not, that will give you a reputation. It's that sort of a reputation that carries on, and years later, it sort of morphs into a very unfactual driven legend. Was he feared? Yeah, absolutely. Was he a guy people just wouldn't touch out of fear of Spiro? Absolutely. And that's the big thing. The Bath Avenue guys only got their reputation because of Spiro. If they weren't with Spiro, forget it. There's no way. Yeah, you're going to have a guy like Joey Calco who's a fucking maniac and he won't hesitate to shoot you. But at the same time, I think a lot of those guys, and you know, I don't want to get specific, but I think a lot of them lived off of the coattails of Anthony Spiro. Without Spiro, then they're just a fringe B&E drug dealing crew. That's it, with no association with the Mafia whatsoever. But because of Spiro, you know, that's where they got. So, you know, is he a rat? Yeah. You know, so it's really all about perspective. Sometimes you can be a legit feared guy on your own, but when you have the backing of someone that everybody fears, like an Anthony Spiro, a Greg Scarpa, a Roy DeMeo, etc., guys are going to think 2 and 3 times before they even fuck with you. And I haven't read the book, so I don't want to give an uninformed perspective. But I always say on this show, take any rat tail and reduce the facts by 85%. That's just sort of my standard. All right. Do you think that? Oh boy. Okay, so we get this question a lot, and so I'm going to try to break it down and just end this question once and for all. All right. Do you think Carlo Gambino appointed? And by the way, I like the way that this question was phrased. Do you think that Carlo Gambino appointed Paul Castellano as a boss, wanting the family to go in a more business-like direction, like in the movie Gotti, when Neil says maybe a street boss isn't what's needed, maybe times have changed? Do you think Carlo might have foresaw that times were changing and that certain rackets weren't going to be doable anymore? First of all, Neil Delacroce never would have said anything like that. In fact, there is a wiretap where Neil Delacroce pretty much looks at Gotti and says, well, you know, if we got to go to war, that's what we're going to do. So Delacroce wasn't going to hesitate on going to war with Paul if it couldn't be worked out. So the fact that I mean, it's a good movie line, but anyway, so the point is that this has been a long debated topic for a long time, and I think, and this is just my 2 cents. You guys can tell me what you think, but I think Carlo knew Paul He wasn't a street guy. And when I say he wasn't a street guy, this is a guy that's not going to run to the closet, grab a gun, and go out and start whacking people. Paul paid his debts. Paul earned the position that he got to. So nobody could take that away from Paul. And Paul was also a dangerous fucking guy. I know at times I have called him a businessman and some other choice terms, but reality is reality, right? Paul Castellano could pick up a phone, hit a button, and 20 people would be killed. So he had power and he had strength, and people did fear him. However, I think that people tend to, take away Paul's toughness. It gets distorted a lot because of the Gotti Sammy Gravano narrative. Did Paul focus too much on business? Probably. I think Carlo knew he needed to leave the family in the hands of somebody who was capable, at least business-wise, to keep things moving forward, who wasn't focused on violence, who was focused on money and keeping the ship sort of moving, with the wind. And you have to understand that Paul and Carlo were very, very close. Paul's biggest mistake, if there was one, was not realizing that those around him were chirping, and they were looking for a leader who they could better sort of get along with in terms of someone who was more affable to the streets. I think Paul, he started in the streets, first of all, but then he eventually ascends the throne and he sort of isolates himself. And I think that was kind of a problem for him. I think people thumbed their nose at him because of just how he sort of acted. And while I certainly understand Paul's narrative in that, I think that he lost a lot of, I don't want to say credibility, but that's kind of the word I want to go with. I think when you become bigger than this thing, you're going to have a problem. Listen, you're from the streets. You're always going to be from the streets. And the minute that you live in a fucking big mansion on Todd Hill and all of this bullshit, it creates a bit of a fucking problem. And so, obviously, I can't speak for Carlo Gambino, but I can give you my ideas. Listen, if I want my family to keep moving forward without the same trappings of other families, I need somebody low-key. I need somebody quiet. I need somebody who can keep things moving in an upward direction. And Paul, at the time, fit that best narrative. We've talked about it on this show before. Carlo never trusted Neil Della Croce, especially after the hit on Anastasia. So I think that the move that Carlo made was probably the best decision at the time. And I think that just Paul got a little bit selfish, and I think Paul let his guard down. If Paul doesn't let his guard down and that hit never takes place, Castellano obviously is going to go to jail for 100 fucking years. Tommy Bellotti would have taken over the family, and the Gambinos would have been a completely different beast. Probably better off. I'm not going to lie to you. Probably better off in the short term and the long term. All right. How do some associates become brilliant earners, well-liked and respected, but still never get their button? What would stop a family from making somebody like that apart from them maybe not wanting to be inducted into life? Okay. So basically, to recap this question, I read it kind of borderline fucking retarded. This person wants to know how is it that there's some associates who make a ton of fucking money, are well liked, well respected, but they never end up getting made? And what stops a family from making a guy other than the guy saying, I don't want to be involved? What I can tell you is, for starters, other families, they got to sign off on it. This is not like, it's not like John Cheeseman says he wants Joey the Dragon made and it happens. A list has to go around. And other crime families have to sign off. There could be a beef between John and, say, somebody from the Colombos, and it can be like, no, we don't want this guy in. And it's as simple as that. The one thing the mob has sort of done, which has become a throwback, is to be very critical of who they make and who they bring around. It used to be 100% Italian. Then it was as long as your father was Italian, and it seems to change with the times. In my opinion, you should have to be Italian to even be considered for membership. That is the way it is. The 100% thing to me, is a little bit old-fashioned. And to prove my point is, even when it was 100%, there were still guys that were 50%ers that were getting in because money speaks volumes. If you're willing to murder and you're making a ton of money, that they're not going to pin you down on, both your parents from Naples. They're not going to do that. And like I said, if you earn and you do as you're told, I don't think many guys are going to hold you back from getting your button. But that brings up sort of a different thought. Why get made at all? Why do you need to become a made guy? Do you really need it? Sure, there's a lot of things that come with it. Respect, power, etc., etc. But if you can earn money and you carry weight because your reputation is dangerous and you're a good guy and you could be trusted, why do you need a title? There is no difference. Guys like Joe Watts, Jimmy Burke, they took part in huge meetings. They took part in major shit. Jimmy wasn't Italian at all. Joe Watts was Welsh. And that didn't change the bottom line for them or their contemporaries. They were still feared, still respected. So you don't need a title. Just earn, and keep it fucking moving. That's the bottom line. Titles get you pinched. Just to be on the totem pole. That in and of itself is an honor. So just to be even sort of mentioned with other people. You think Jimmy Burke gave a fuck about getting made? Fuck no. He wanted to know what the fucking numbers racket was doing. He wanted to know how much was coming out of fucking Idlewild and JFK. So that's my point. All right. If somehow the feds came to you and said that these three were going into the witness protection program and one's going to be living in the house next door to you, and you can choose which one of these three that you have to live next to, who would you choose? Mickey Featherstone, Roy DeMeo, or Abe Kid Twist Arelas? Pick one and go, and moving is not an option. Mickey Featherstone might be an interesting guy to hear singing karaoke shitface late at night. But I honestly couldn't live next to any of them. I wouldn't move. They would be in about 10 different garbage bags by the end of the night, if that tells you anything. There's just no way I could do it. All right. Boy. All right. Out of every mobster that ever lived, who do you think would have made the best president? Imagine Albert Anastasia as president, taking care of all the rats, no witness protection, just a bullet to the head. In my opinion, Russell Buffalino would have made a great president. He was smart. He was low-key. He was a good businessman. Very unassuming, very gentle. That would be, hands down, I think, the guy that I would go with. All right, had Roy DeMeo stayed with the Lucchese crime family and not joined into Nino's crew, do you think he would have lived longer? And if so, could he have challenged Vic and Gaspipe for leadership? No. Listen, I don't think Roy DeMeo had any compunction about wanting to run a crime family. I think Roy DeMeo was comfortable being a captain. He was comfortable making his money, doing what he had to do. And the reason why I said it is I think that if Roy had a design on being sort of an underboss or a boss at some point, I think he would have not done some of the things that he did. He wasn't a stupid guy. He was a very bright guy, a brutal guy. And I think you're right. I think if he had just stayed the fuck away from the Gambino crime family, I think he would have been better off. Would he have lived longer? I think so. But he was sloppy in so many fucking ways that I just don't see. If you take away, I don't want to say take away the DeMeo crew, but take away what Paul Castellano sort of allowed them to do. The car stealing business, shipping it off to Bahrain and Kuwait, that got Paul Castellano pinched. It got everybody pinched. There were some things they did that was sloppy, and they ended up killing a lot of people they probably didn't necessarily have to kill. So I think ultimately, it's hard to say. It's hard to say, but I think if you take away a couple of certain things, I think he does live longer. But I think just if you take the car business off the fucking map, I think, it doesn't get Paul pinched, doesn't make Paul angry. DeMeo doesn't get killed because of it. So yeah, he probably would have lived longer, but you got to take some of them crimes off the table. All right, was Al Capone independent? I heard he hated the mafia and the rules. Plus, he was in Chicago running things his own way, and he hated the New York Commission. I heard his father was strong-armed by the New York mob, and this is why he hated them. So as far as I'm concerned, see, this is a tough question because Al Capone, while he was a little bit independent, he still answered to the New York Commission. He still went to commission meetings. So obviously he had the respect of his contemporaries. Obviously they had a lot of respect for him. I think he did some things they didn't fucking like. And to say that New York totally controlled Al Capone, I don't think that's the case, because if they totally controlled Capone, then the St. Valentine's Day massacre wouldn't have happened. In fact, I think it was the Atlantic City fucking conference meeting that they had where the New York mob was pissed. The commission was pissed at Al Capone for doing what he did because it brought way too much heat, and they had to sit down over it. So to give the guy enough respect to bring him in and say, what the fuck are you doing, says a lot. Was he independent? I think he was probably the most independent, gangster we've ever seen. Did he hate the mafia? No, I don't think he did, because they brought him a lot of money. You got to remember is that even though he's in Chicago and Indiana and other places, he still has business with the New York guys. You got to remember, he was born in Brooklyn, grew up in Brooklyn, and he knew them his whole life. I don't know about his father being strong-armed, but knowing Al Capone, I don't think he would have tolerated that. But, you learn something new every day, but I'll have to look into that. But I can tell you for sure is that, he did have a disdain for the rules. He didn't like the pageantry of the mob. He was just Al Capone. He was just a different guy. Just a different guy. Now, and people are going to get very upset at me for saying this, but take away the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Take away the press. Who the fuck is Al Capone? Seriously. Deanna O'Banion and all these other people in Chicago and surrounding areas. Take away St. Valentine's Day massacre. Take away fucking all of the Thomas Dewey going after him for IRS and shit. Take that away from him. Who is Al Capone? He's no different than anybody else. He had a very short run. What is it, 4.5 years? 5 years? Same as Gotti. Very short run. You take the Paul Castellano hit off the table, John Gotti is nothing. That's the bottom line. And there are people that I know that will tell you the same thing. You take the Paul Castellano hit off the table and it never happens. John Gotti is never John Gotti. He's just Johnny in the Bronx, Johnny in Brooklyn at that point. All right. Why do you think when Angelo Bruno was killed that Russell Bufalino didn't step in to take care of things in Philadelphia, being that Bruno and him were close friends? Or was it that Bufalino was busy with other things at the moment? I just think, if I had to imagine, Russell Bufalino's stance probably would have been to stay as far away from that bullshit as he could, just because of the sheer fucking heat. The sheer heat and the sheer problems that brought. I'm sure that inquiries would have been made, but ultimately that would have been a commission issue. And it was, and it ended up being that way. And I'm sure he was informed as to what was going on, but Bufalino was smart, and he didn't step on toes. What's good for all was good for him. And he wasn't an egotist. And this is why he died not in prison. He died in his own home, for the most part. And he was one of the brightest guys to ever be. So he probably just, I think for relative conversation, I think he just, was he upset? I'm sure he was. But what can he do about it? At that point, Philadelphia became sort of a powder keg very quickly, and was that way until, the Young Turks came in and fucking shut it down. So there you go. Was a mobster ever ordered to be killed because he brought his girlfriend to a restaurant that he would bring his wife to? No, I don't think so. That's a lot of Hollywood bullshit. Most guys, if they're cheating on their wives, keep that shit to themselves. And they're not going to publicly embarrass their wives like that. That's just, at least if they're stand up, they won't. All right. Is there any way you could do a show on William Camussino Sr. or Carl Tuffy DeLuna or the River Quay War back in the 70s? Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely work on that. All right. Is the outfit larger and more powerful than the Five Families? Please elaborate. No, they never were, and they never will be. Chicago in its prime probably had 300 guys, 350 guys and associates, maybe a little bit more. Because Chicago, for a long, Chicago at its height, there were two periods for that, right? First one is Al Capone. And there were so many gangsters and hundreds, but Al Capone's side of that thing wasn't like 500 versus like 50 here, 50 there. The second time period for Chicago was in the 60s. And the reason why the outfit was so powerful in its prime was because of politics. That had everything to do with it. And so if we take Chicago in the 60s, maybe they have 300 guys total. New York probably at the time had 250 people per family. So if you do the math, they weren't bigger and they weren't as powerful either. And here's an example. Sam Giancana could not shut down an entire eastern seaboard. Carlo Gambino could. That's fucking power. Sam Giancana didn't have that kind of power. Paul Ricca didn't have that kind of power. And a lot of the power base that Chicago had to do with politics. Now, Chicago today, the guy who's running shit now is a tough guy. He is a tough fucking guy. He's a scary guy, and he means business. And so I would think that, Chicago is probably going to see an uptick in the way things are going. And I think things are sort of reverting back to the 60s in Chicago, not in terms of politics, but just in terms of going under the radar, especially with the death of John No-Nose DeFranzo, the guy who stepped in now. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's a very street capable guy, a real smart guy. And I think that if he has any length of time to do what he wants to do, I think you're going to see Chicago come back a little bit. All right, if you were ever made, which family would it be? I wouldn't want to be made. Never. I don't give a fuck. Somebody can come to me for $1 million, say, yeah, we're going to make you. I just, you know what? Earn money, keep it moving. Just earn money and keep it moving. And this may get me in trouble, but listen, let me give you some advice. My grandfather told me at a very young age, titles bring down dynasties. Never forget that. Titles bring down dynasties. All right, if you were a boss of a crime family and the commission is splitting the unions, you could pick one for your family to control. Which one would you choose? Which would be the most lucrative to set your family up for the next 50 years? Concrete and rebar. Always construction. You know why? Because construction never ends. Narcotics never ends either, but for the sake of talking about unions, always concrete, rebar, anything to do with construction. Zoning. I mean, it doesn't matter. Construction, because that's never going to end. All right, was Joey Gallo really schizophrenic? Okay. No, I don't think Joey... There was a second part of this question, but I'm going to skip that. I don't think Joey Gallo was schizophrenic. I think a lot of what he did was because he simply didn't give a fuck. That's the reality. And if 2 or 3 or 4 people think you're fucking nuts, they're going to stay away from you. Sometimes a loud voice is enough to move people out of the way. And sometimes, a bottle opener through the thorax is a big statement. Was he crazy? No. He just didn't give a fuck. He believed in himself, and he wouldn't hesitate to do what he needed to do. That's what a man does. A guy who's going to kill you ain't going to tell you. He's just going to kill you. You know, what are you going to do? Call up and say, yeah, on Thursday at 3 a.m., just as the moon is fucking coming up on full, I'm going to put 2 in the back of your head and 1 in the tip of your dick. You're not going to say that. You're just going to go kill the fucking prick. But no, I don't think he was crazy at all. I think he was determined. I think Joey Gallo could have been a very interesting boss had he just not been used by so many people and didn't realize it. Carlo Gambino played him like a fucking fiddle until he didn't need him anymore, and then he had him killed. I think, you would be hard-pressed to convince me that Carlo Gambino and Carmine Persco weren't 2 of the biggest treacherous people to ever fucking live that life. All right. Which lawyer was best at getting mob guys less time or even acquitted? You know what? In my opinion, and I don't want to throw the term mob lawyer out there because there's a lot of good lawyers that typically defend mob guys, but they do other areas of law. The best, in my opinion, that ever was a guy by the name of Roy Cohn. You can look up all of that stuff. He was unreal as an attorney. And he got guys fantastic fucking deals, unbelievable deals. He is probably the best of the best that has ever lived. Eddie Jacobs is a great attorney. And I don't want to call him a mob lawyer either because he defends a lot of people, but he's bright. He's very bright. And I know he probably doesn't like me at all, but that's okay. I'm not everybody's cup of fucking tea, but I marveled at what he was doing in the Joey Merlino trial, just because I'm so used to seeing soft attorneys. And he just kind of stands up there matter of fact and says, look, you fucking lying sack of shit. You're a lying sack of shit. Here's exactly why you're a lying sack of shit. What do you have to say? And I like lawyers who battle for their clients. So many times I can tell you that I've had lawyers in my life and they sit there like bitches and they barely say anything. I want an attorney who's going to stand up and say, no, you motherfucker. That's not, I want an attorney who's going to fight. And I've had, I think one attorney my whole entire life that stood up and fucking fought. And it was a stupid fucking speeding case. They charged me with reckless driving or whatever, doing like 25 over. He fought like hell for me. And I got lucky because the cop that ended up pulling me over for some reason fell off his motorcycle and had his legs broken. I don't know. He just didn't show up, so they threw it out of court. But my lawyer was like a bulldog, and that's what you want. Also, Charlie Carnese, God rest his soul. Great lawyer. Great lawyer. Was a good attorney. And Charlie took a lot of cases that were almost unwinnable, and he would find a way to win. I know people would probably expect me to bring up Bruce Cutler in that, but there is a question later on down the line about Bruce Cutler, so I will answer that then. Before he was president, did Donald Trump have a lot of dealings with the Mafia, and if so, what family? Well, okay. Without Scarf Inc., his casinos don't get built in Atlantic City. Without the Gambinos and the Concrete Club, his buildings in New York City don't get built. Does he have ties to the Mafia? Of course. I mean, a lot of politicians do, but you got to understand, Donald Trump was in a business prior to being the president, that he needed help with the unions and et cetera. It would always be in the form of the perspective of buildings, controlling the labor costs, cement, the unions, bypassing city code laws. And that was it. Past that, no, absolutely zero involvement. But as far as that goes, yes. Have you watched the documentary Game Changers? No, I have never heard of it, and I will definitely check it out. All right, was it Russell Bufalino who insisted the word mafia was not used in The Godfather, and why was this? Okay, so this is another one that people continuously get wrong, and I see this all on these group pages. They talk Joe Colombo. First of all, Joe Colombo didn't have that kind of power. That's number one. You mean to tell me Joe Colombo was more powerful than Carlo Gambino or Russell Bufalino? No. A lot of people have claimed it was Joe Colombo, but it really was Russell Bufalino. And the reason why is because they didn't want to give the government any satisfaction. They didn't want to get any heat. They thought it would bring heat onto them, and they were trying to control the narrative. The unions, which worked on The Godfather, were all controlled by the Mafia, and I'd imagine there were probably 100 no-show jobs. And that's the price of doing business, but also that Russell Bufalino controlled Paramount. A lot of people don't know that. He was the force behind Paramount as far as what they could do. I know that this is exactly the reason why Francis Ford Coppola did not want to make The Godfather 2, because they had a lot of problems. But that's just the price of doing business. All right, why did Carlo Gambino use the Colombo hitman instead of his own to kill Albert Anastasia? Well, you got to throw off the scent, right? The power of denial is an important thing. Even if they secretly know he's kind of behind it, the fact that he lets somebody else do it, it gives him the power to be able to deny it. That's not me. It was these guys, And a lot of times they will use outside families to handle their business. It's just the reality of the life. Does the Mafia have much power in prison, considering the, I guess, Aryan Brotherhood and different ethnic groups are there? They do, but it's limited to their own groups. I think it just depends on which decade you're talking about, too. I mean, everybody has their own de facto leader, their shot caller, and things are all handled between the leaders of every group. So do they have a say? Yeah, absolutely. But do they control it all? Absolutely not. Probably not. And it also depends what prison you're in, too. State prison is going to be a little bit different than federal. All right, could you break down Jimmy Burke's rackets and roughly estimate what he was pulling in from each? Also, with Jimmy being as street smart as he was, why did he keep Henry Hill around as long as he did? I can't break those down because I don't know all of his rackets, nor does anybody. Unless you were there, you really don't know. But what I can tell you is this, that the airport stuff, probably in them days was $100,000 a month on the minimum. Narcotics, who knows? Jimmy was involved in everything, so there isn't a distinct number that I can give you. But I can logically assume that Jimmy was a multimillionaire, 100%. I think the reason why he kept Henry Hill around is because Henry Hill brought him money. Look, make no mistake, Henry Hill was a piece of shit in every fucking category, but he knew how to make money. And he knew how to make money for Jimmy. He knew how to make money for Paulie and a lot of other people. But not on the level that he would like you to believe or that Goodfellas would like you to believe. He was a schemer, and that was his brilliance. He was able to handicap basketball. He was able to set up the fix. And that's why he's valuable to Jimmy. That's why he's valuable to the Lucchese crime family. And he would do whatever Jimmy asked him without hesitation. Henry Hill always claimed that he had never murdered anybody, but I don't believe that to be the case. I think he participated in multiple murders. Just being honest with you, because if you think about how Jimmy Burke did business, I mean, after Lufthansa, he killed everybody. He didn't fucking hesitate. Why not Henry? You know, so Henry must have participated in some things, and I have it on good source, and maybe someday I'll talk about this, but I have it on good source that Henry was the shooter in 3 murders. That's all I'm going to tell you. And I have more than, I don't want to say substantial proof, but I have enough to sort of lead me in the direction that Henry took part in some sick shit. But, you know, as long as things are on the up and up and the money's coming in, you know, everybody's great. The minute the money stops, you're yesterday's news, and they put you out with the fucking papers. That's it. All right, Jeff, have you ever played another sport besides hockey? Yeah, I played baseball as a kid. I was a good second baseman. I was a good pitcher. When I say good, I mean for a kid, I was good. You know, I could throw a curveball at a very young age. But I really was not good at hitting the ball. Like softball, I'm great at, right? Because it's a big fucking ball. But for some reason, I just wasn't a good batter in baseball. My father, however, was a fucking unreal, fantastic baseball player. And he actually played semi-pro in the Philippines, which may not say a whole lot, but my dad was a really good ball player. And my brother, too, was a very, very, very good ball player. And he was a great hockey goalie, too. You know, in fact, here's a tiny little story. So my father was coaching like a summer league with my brother. I think my brother was in his 20s, and the talent in this league was insane. It might as well have been professional baseball. These guys were all that good. I mean, this wasn't just a summer league. This was a summer league where guys were throwing 90, 95 miles an hour. And my father was the manager of that team. I think that they were sponsored by Hooters. And my father would just pace back and forth on the bench, dropping F words every 3 minutes, chewing tobacco, spitting everywhere. And it was funny to see my father in his 50s doing this. And one day something happened, somebody got hurt, and he had to pinch in to bat. Keep in mind, my father is like in his mid-50s at this point. You know, my father was never a big guy, probably 5'9", 155, 160 pounds if he's lucky on a good day. But my father stepped into bat, and I remember I was their bat boy. And I remember just sitting there going, oh, fuck, this isn't going to end well. Because keep in mind, you know, my father's vision at the time, my father, first of all, was colorblind. That's number one. And we knew that by the shitty fucking awful clothes. I mean, you don't wear like green pants and like an orange shirt. He didn't match his clothes whatsoever. And whatever was plaid, we would go to the store, and my father goes, is this green? I was like, it's fucking red. You can't tell the difference between green and red. I don't know. And so he would look like a fucking Christmas tree half the time. He wouldn't match his shit at all. So he was colorblind, and his vision was shitty. His vision was always shitty. He refused to wear glasses. That was just my father's thing. But anyway, he stepped into bat. And I remember going, oh, this is going to be interesting because these guys threw 85, 95 miles an hour, and that's no fucking joke. In fact, one of the guys, there were 2 guys that played like AAA ball, and one of the lead pitcher, the starting pitcher on this team was throwing 96, 97 miles an hour his whole life. Could have been a pro baseball player, could have played in the major leagues, but he was a fucking cement head. And what a cement head's a term that I use. My father used to use it for people to just get into trouble for no other fucking reason. They can't control their emotions. This was the guy who, when they were at practice, somebody hit the ball over a fence, and there was a nasty fucking pit bull who bit everybody living next door. And this guy, Chris, says, I'm going to go get the ball. And they're all like, Chris, why would you fucking do that? Dog's going to bite you. He takes a bat and he jumps the fence. He screams at the dog. All you hear is the dog run away. That's how fucking ferocious this guy, Chris, was. So anyway, my father steps into the plate. Here comes the first pitch. It almost hits him in the fucking head. He ducks. And then he starts talking shit. My father's 50-some fucking years old, and he's running his mouth like he's fucking in his 20s and as a fucking sailor. Second pitch comes in, my father moves out the way. Third pitch comes in, and my father drills it in the left field and starts taking off, down 90 feet down to the bag. You know, but even in his mid-50s, he could still fucking hit the ball. This is a guy that hit like a 90-some mile an hour fucking curveball in the left field in his mid-50s. So, baseball was his thing. He was a great hockey coach too, but he couldn't skate. He never played hockey. But really, the two main sports in my family was baseball and hockey, and all of us kids played both. All right. Okay. Can you tell us the Albanian hit story? Okay, so I could tell that story, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a really short break really quick, and when I come back, we will continue the Q&A. Stay tuned on Mob Talk Radio. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are continuing the Q&A, and the question we left off with was my buddy, this is my favorite guy actually of all the people that contribute to the Q&A. Gordon asks a lot of good questions. So he wants for me to talk about the Albanian hit story. I've told this story a couple times. There's sort of some background we got to get into a little bit as far as this goes. And so at the time, I was embroiled in a legal matter. A lot of people know. I can't go into those details, obviously, but what I can tell you is this. So more or less, there was sort of, at the time this legal thing was going on, there were ways and designs of getting at this person to infuriate them, to get them to do dumb shit. And one of the things that my lawyer had done at the time was he had posted on Facebook some wanted posters, wanted lost dog, lost rat, refusing to cooperate with lawyers and etc. And that really infuriated this person beyond belief. And so there were a couple instances where my lawyer was followed, he was chased, just weird shit was going on. And probably a couple of weeks before this happened, somebody got shot and killed right in front of me in Brooklyn at Bed-Stuy. And while it was unrelated, it was still creepy. And so what happened was, I think there was one day, I think we were heading to Queens for something, and we decided to stop in Park Slope to get something to eat. It was a Turkish restaurant. Parked along the side, walked in, we sit down, we eat our meal. Everything's normal, nothing's going on. And the way that this is set up is you've got storefronts on the left, storefronts on the right. There's not a lot of parking. And so we're sitting there, and about halfway through the meal, he looks up at me and says, I don't want to alarm you, but I think we're being watched. Now, immediately, I didn't give a fuck, because this lawyer has a tendency to just be a hypochondriac about a lot of things. So it's okay, yeah, somebody's watching us. You're goofy. You're fucking nuts or whatever. And my back is sitting to the door, which is not something I typically do. I typically, whenever I go anywhere, and I've been this way since I was a kid. I like to see who's coming in. I like to see who's leaving. I want to know how to get in and get out if, God forbid, something happens. It's just always the way I've been. So I have my back to the door, and he's, don't look, don't look, don't look. Okay, now you can look. And I look over my shoulder, and I see two guys, obviously European. They're not American, and they're sitting in an SUV, and they're sitting within viewing distance of the door, so they can see everything that's coming in and out. And at first, I'm kind of yeah, whatever. But I noticed it's just going on 20 minutes. So we're trying to figure out how to deal with it. Because I thought he was just fucking crazy, and there's no way nobody's watching us. I mean, who the fuck's gonna watch us? Feds? Okay, maybe it was the feds, but I'm nah, it's not the feds. And so what I do is this. I end up grabbing my phone, and I'm holding down the fucking, how you can hold your button down on a phone and take hundreds of pictures in a second. So I'm holding it at my waist, and I'm just holding the button down. As I walk out the front door, they move up 20, 30, 40 feet. So I can't get a look at them. But what I was able to do was get a photo of their license plate. I come back in, and then they back up, and now they're sitting in front of the store again. I'm okay, this is weird. So then I walk out again. They move up again. Now I know we've got a problem, because it's just not normal. It's just not normal, because they could have parked somewhere, but they're sitting in the emergency shoulder lane, staring at us, and they keep looking up. And if I look, they look away. So we're playing this game. So I'm sitting there, And I'm like, fuck. So I grab a knife off the fucking, a knife off the table. I'm like sticking it in my pocket. I was like, fuck, what good is a knife going to do? And I look at him and said, we walk out there, they're going to pop us. Like he's, I don't know. So I go and I look again. They move up and come back. And my fucking lawyer is nowhere to be found. He's gone. I'm like, I looked at the waitress. So where the fuck did he go? Oh, he went to the bathroom or whatever. I don't know what he was doing. Maybe he's getting on the phone. I don't know. So the plan is I asked the waitress, is there a back door? She says, nah, it's only a front door. I'm like, fuck. So I tell my lawyer, says, here's what we're going to do. I said, we're going to walk out. We're going to go straight to the car. We're going to get in. We're going to flip a U-turn and just fucking lay on the gas and don't let up. So we go out. And as we go out, they start pulling up, another 70 feet or so. Get in the car. He pulls out in front of a car, almost creates an accident just because we needed a little breathing room. And we get out. We get to a stoplight. And we see they pull in like 3 cars behind us. And I'm like, okay, so this is no longer fucking coincidence. So I tell him, I said, we need to flip a U-turn. So we go down, and then next thing I know, he cuts off another car, turns around, and then parks in on the right-hand side on the shoulder. These motherfuckers not only flip a UE2, they pull in ahead of us. Now we're boxed in, and I'm screaming. I'm like, Jesus Christ, we're fucking blocked in. Get the fuck out of here. We're sitting ducks. We can't back up. We can't go forward. I don't give a fuck. Just get the fuck out of here. So the whole time, this guy sitting in the passenger seat is keeping his hands down, which tells me he's got a gun. Okay, because that's just not, when people are riding and doing whatever and they're not looking to create no nonsense or mischief, one arm's out the window, one's arm's up in their hair, they're doing something, because you can't just sit in a car and just sit motionless. But he keeps, moving his left hand down by his knees, which led me to believe we're going to get fucking shot. And so what ends up happening is he ends up pulling out ahead of a car, and then he floors it. So we're going down the streets in Park Slope at like 75, 80 miles an hour. We're flying, and they're keeping up with us. They're cutting in and out, trying to get up close to us. Then we're coming to an intersection. I was screaming for him to go left because it would have caused an accident or whatever, but we would have been able to get far enough ahead of them. Because I see that they're moving from the right to the left, so they're going to come up on our left-hand side, and we're fucked because there's cars parked everywhere. There's nowhere for us to go. So I'm screaming, well, you have 2 choices. You can either pit the motherfucker by hitting their back end or flying and going through every fucking red light humanly possible. Keep in mind, we're doing 60, 70 fucking miles an hour down a thoroughfare in Park Slope, burning lights, right through red lights, and they're right on top of us. Finally, at the last second, I just screamed, turn. He hits the right-hand turn. The car goes up on 2 fucking wheels. The smoke's coming everywhere, and we just fucking 80 miles an hour. And they tried to keep up with us, but eventually, we lost them, thank God. But that's pretty much the story. And to make it even more severe, we ended up, taking the picture of the license plate to some people that we know, the private detectives that can look up this kind of stuff, and it came back to the Bronx, and it came back to Albanians. And to further make that story creepy is that somebody who was a former informant was shown those photos and verified the same 2 assholes came to his fucking house threatening his mother and his family. So they were obviously hired by somebody who will remain nameless, of course, but that's sort of the Albanian hit story. All right. Did a Trump presidency have an effect on Cosa Nostra? Did it help it, hurt it, or no effect? I think it helps because the FBI sort of has its hands full with, other things. But if I had to be honest, I think, 9/11 helped the mob more than anything because the task force at the time was diminished. The importance of terrorism sort of took the number 1 spot. I mean, when the president says the mob is good, they're good people, just don't owe them money is very telling about where we're at least historically speaking, from a government perspective. I know that Trump doesn't like flippers and informants and et cetera, so I can see where some of his viewpoints do help. But I don't think one could go either way with it, to be honest with you. I mean, if Trump changes the standards with the FBI, then yes, absolutely. But if he doesn't, then eventually the feds are going to circle back. But I think the days of 100 agents watching a crime family are pretty much over. Okay, you once told a story about the morning story. What is that? Okay, just really quickly. So when my grandmother died, this is decades ago. I obviously had never seen a dead body or whatever. And it's my grandmother, so I'm upset and whatever. And we get to the funeral home. And my father says, come on, let's sit in the front row. First of all, I don't want to sit in the front row and look at a dead body. It's just not my cup of tea. It's not what I wanted to do. I was a little freaked out. I was just a kid. But my father explained to me, no, you don't understand. At a wake, the front row is the best spot to be. It's where all the action happens. And I'm looking at my father. Action? What the fuck are you talking about? My father, always being the fucking comedian that he was, he liked the front row because, in his opinion, the professional mourners that would arrive would be well worth it. And I'll give you an example. He looks at me and goes, you see your cousin this one or your uncle this one. See how they're crying? He goes, that's nothing. Wait till your Aunt Mary gets here. She's a professional mourner, and you cannot beat that shit with a stick. It's like a carnival act. And I didn't know what he was talking about. My Aunt Mary comes in, starts screaming, dropping to her knees, screaming. And my father starts laughing and pokes me with his elbow. Goes, see, I told you, professional mourners. You can't get any better than this. So there you go. That's the professional mourner story. They say the Bronx is home to the real Little Italy versus the one in Manhattan. Is this true? If so, can you tell us why that would be so, and maybe explain some differences between them? So the Bronx, Little Italy now, it's all Hispanics and Albanians. The Italians are there, but it's not what it was. It's very Albanian. The Little Italy began in Manhattan, and you'd be hard-pressed to tell me that the Bronx is now the real Little Italy. The amount of the Italian, Albanian-owned restaurants is just absolutely staggering in the Bronx, and I personally think that there are more Italians probably in the Bronx than in Manhattan these days. But then again, Joey Gallo's sister still lives on Mulberry Street. But the Bronx, like I said, has so many Albanians and Puerto Ricans now that it's really not the same. Obviously, you have Patsy Rigoletto's. But short of that, a lot of the Italian-owned restaurants in the Bronx are owned by Albanians, believe it or not. All right, what is it about the American Mafia that separates them from the Mafia over in Italy, et cetera, et cetera? Well, the first thing is the ones in Italy will kill fucking women, they'll kill children, they'll kill politicians, they'll kill cops. That is the single biggest difference. The second difference is I think that the idea of family is a little bit more sacred in Italy. I think that they take some of the pageantry very, very seriously. I think that they believe, and I'm not saying that guys here don't believe it, they do, but there's a difference. I also think that the way that the mob is set up over in Italy is a little bit different. The very same structure, but there's so many little fringe groups, little clans that work with this one, work with that one. And so I think I think they're more organized, to be honest with you. Just my opinion. All right. Do you think, considering the political climate with Black Lives Matter and how New York is in chaos with rioting because the mayor won't let the police do their job, if this happened when Gambino or Castellano was a boss, they wouldn't have allowed this lawlessness to continue? The only thing I can really say is if you go back to the 60s, the race riots and everything else, the mob wasn't able to control that then. So what makes you think they can control that now? New York isn't really in chaos as much as it's losing people that live here. I mean, we've had a mass exodus here in New York. People are leaving. They're not coming back. Businesses that have been operating for 40, 50 years are closing and not reopening. I think a lot of the problem, to be perfectly honest with you, is de Blasio is a piece of shit. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm not saying I'm a Republican because I'm actually a Democrat, believe it or not. That doesn't mean I'm going to vote that way. But at the end of the day, I think de Blasio is a large part of the problem, is specifically where I live. Back in the 80s, 70s and 80s, this is where all the rock stars lived. This is where like Eric Clapton hung out. This is where Hendrix bought, drugs. This was a very artsy neighborhood. Now what you're seeing is, you would always have stragglers, 2 or 3 homeless guys shooting up, whatever the fuck. That was one thing. Now there's 30 on each corner, and it's bad. It's really bad. And a lot of it is because de Blasio has treated the police like shit. He doesn't give them any respect. He doesn't care about them. And their whole perspective is, well, if you don't give a fuck about us, then we're not exactly going to go out of our way to make arrests. And that's sort of what you see it happen. That is not so much Cuomo's fault. I know a lot of people don't like Cuomo, but that's not necessarily completely his fault. The gripe that I think that people have with Cuomo is just that I think, first of all, he's battled Trump, which a lot of people don't like. He's spoken out against Trump, which a lot of people don't like. But I think the thing that really is upsetting New Yorkers, and I'm not speaking for New Yorkers, but is that businesses should be back opened. Listen, I get the coronavirus, I get all of this, but let me give you a good reference point, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist whatsoever. I was talking to my doctor. He says, Jeff, they opened up bars in Long Island and restaurants in Long Island. You can go in there and sit and eat, which I know because you walk in with your mask on, then you go to a table, you sit down and take it off. My doctor said to me, do these fucking idiots know that this is an airborne pathogen? You cough, it comes out. You sneeze on your arm, you touch something, it comes out. He goes, what is protecting you? He goes, do you really think 3-foot glass is going to protect you from getting sick? And so that's my fucking point. And a lot of people have that perspective. And this is somebody from the medical field who's a great doctor that just said, look, the reality is that you can't do anything to stop it. There are things you can do to help mitigate the chances of you getting it. But the reality is that it's airborne. So it makes no fucking sense to keep these businesses shut down. And people are losing tons of money, but then they're going to allow Long Island to open up, wear a mask for 5 minutes, take it off, eat. It's rhetorical. And so I think that that's a lot of the problem that New Yorkers have is there are businesses that want to make money. You could play conspiracy theory all day long, but I just think that at some point you've got to get to the point where, listen, a pandemic's a fucking pandemic, but if you own a business, if you want to open up your business, you should have every fucking right to do so. If people want to take the risk and go and get sick, that's on them. I don't think the government and I don't think city or state politicians should be able to tell you what you can and can't do. Look, if I want to go get a haircut and I want to take the risk of getting sick, that's on me. I can't blame nobody. And I think you're really seeing the effects of this bullshit down in Philadelphia with that fucking jerk off Kenny and fucking Tom Wolfe jerk offs. They have just the stuff in that fucking thing that is with Tom Wolfe. I don't even know what that fucking thing is. I don't know if it's a man, it's a woman. I listen, not being disrespectful to anybody that's a he, she, he, or whatever the fuck the case may be. I have no problem with anybody living how they want to live, but I don't know what the fuck this thing is. And this thing is certainly not intelligent. None of them are. And if cities like New York are getting hit so hard with this pandemic bullshit and everything else that's going on, look at Philadelphia. I mean, it is South Philadelphia especially. They don't have a ton of money to begin with. And Philadelphia numbers-wise isn't as bad as New York. So why didn't they open sooner? Okay, you can open a gym. First of all, ball sweat all over everything, sweat, sneezing, all of this shit. How is that safe? But yet going to have a beer isn't. And so I think there's a big disconnect and a big problem. And I really didn't want to talk about this shit because it's highly political and I don't like to get into this shit. But at the end of the day, how can you tell one it's okay and then not the fucking other? Either open everything up or close everything down. You can't have it two ways. They didn't shut the fucking airports down. They should have done that. Why didn't they shut the airports down for 3 weeks? Sorry, guys, we're shutting the airports down for a month. So they have all of these ways that they shoulda, coulda, woulda. But the shit that they didn't do, and I don't blame that on Trump or anybody. I'm just saying I don't think anybody really fully fucking comprehended how bad the shit was. But how can you say one can open but the other can't? They like to use big words like essential. And reality is, I'm sorry, grocery stores are essential. Liquor stores are essential. Businesses are essential. And as long as Cuomo and de Blasio and whoever else wants to cherry pick what can open and what can't. They open pools, for Christ's sake. Pools. Everybody pisses in pools. You want to talk about a breeding ground for fucking a virus? So I think that's what the problem is, and I'm going to shut up now. But the point is that I just think the idea of picking and choosing what you can say is open and what you can't, it's hypocritical. Either open it all or close it all. That's it. All right. Jeff, I heard you once say that Tony Luke's is not that good. What is your favorite cheesesteak place in Philly? I used to go to Phillips on Passyunk Ave all the time. Nothing beats original Nick's roast beef on 20th and Jackson. Have you ever eaten there? If not, check it out. It's great. It's not that I totally totally dislike Tony Luke's. I just think it's very bland. It's very bland. I think it's sloppily made. Geno's and Pat's, in my opinion, are better. And it's all tourist shit, and I understand that. But listen, when you're hammered in South Philadelphia at 3 o'clock in the morning, you need something to eat. It doesn't really matter at that point because you're just looking to put something down your throat. Nick's is my favorite spot. I'll be honest with you, hands down. I've eaten at a lot of places in Philadelphia. I even went to the Oregon Diner. Not that the food's good there. I like coffee. I like diner coffee. I always have. And I've been to the Oregon Diner late at night just for a quick grab. And I always ask for the Nicky Scarfo seating section, and they don't get it. I walk in and go, can I have the Nicky Scarfo seating section, please? And they don't get it, and I start laughing. And then when I sit down, I was like, do you mind removing all the butter knives, please? They don't get it, but, it's the small things in life that make me fucking laugh. All right. How did Tommy DeSimone and Jimmy Burke originally hook up, and do you think they had a close relationship as Goodfellas portrayed them to have had? I think Jimmy used him as he saw fit, and Jimmy met him through some other people. They were close, but then again, Jimmy ultimately has him killed, and people will debate me on that for the next century. But he was fed to the lamb. He was fed like a lamb to the slaughter. And one could argue justifiably so or not, but it's an end that justifies the means in that world. All right, is it hard for the American Mafia to get new recruits joining these days? Why do people want to still join the mob when everybody always ends up in jail or there's so many rats? Well, why does anybody become a baker, a banker, a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer? It's just something that they want to do. There's money, prestige, there's power, and who wouldn't want that? I mean, I know it sounds like a lopsided statement, but for some guys, that's all they know. They were born into it, and they're addicted to the action. The action is insane. It's that action that keeps them in probably way longer than they should be. That's why I always say, have a number on your mind, make it, and get the fuck out. All right. What if Tommy DeSimone didn't kill that guy in Henry's bar? Excuse me. Would Jimmy have had killed him anyway to keep his rackets? Tommy didn't kill him, believe it or not. Jimmy did. That's one of the bigger lies that Goodfellas tells. There's a lot of things about Goodfellas that they didn't get right, but the fact is this. Let's just rehash it once again. William Benvena, a.k.a. Billy Bats, ends up going away, and Jimmy absorbs his rackets, and he makes them insanely profitable. When William Benvena, who was a made guy in the Gambinos, gets out, naturally he wants the rackets back. Rather than going to Jimmy Burke and dealing with him directly, he ends up going to the Gambinos to complain, and that was a big mistake. Jimmy then kills him without hesitation, doesn't give a fuck. The Gambinos were not going to step in because Jimmy was making them way too much money. But at the same time, Jimmy needed to suffice the Gambinos. So this is why Jimmy pretty much leads Tommy to the slaughter. He clipped Tommy, not anybody else. A lot of people say Gotti did it. That's not fucking true. Tommy was reckless to begin with, and Jimmy didn't want the Lufthansa heist, which Tommy essentially put together, getting out of hand. So there's a lot of things that played into Jimmy saying, okay, well, it's feasible. Let me just kill him. It's easier for me to do that. So it's a matter of Jimmy coming to terms with offering his head to keep the Gambinos at least satisfied via their reputations more than anything. And what I mean by that is the Gambinos have to have it look a certain way to appease other people. So Jimmy goes, all right, so I'll just kill him, and I've got a million other reasons why I want to kill him, so we'll just kill him, and then you guys can go back and tell them that it was handled. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, the Gambinos wanted retribution, and at the least, a little retribution had to be shown, and Tommy ends up becoming the scapegoat of that. I often wonder if Jimmy had told them to fuck off, what would have happened. You imagine if Jimmy Burke said, fuck you, what would they have done? Jimmy had a lot of power, and nobody was willing to forsake the money that he was bringing in at the time. I mean, I suppose they could have killed him and absorbed his rackets, but I think his ties to the Gambinos, to John Gotti, to Paul Vario, and other families kept him very, very well insulated, and he had a ferocious fucking reputation on top of it. So there you go. Oh, boy. All right. Sorry. We're late, so save this for your next round trip. Rather than a question, it's a royal request. We don't think you've ever covered in distinguished depth as only you can. Mob lawyers such as Frank Regano and that loudmouth courtroom bully Bruce Cutler plus others, especially Paramount honcho Robert Evans' lawyer, the supremely powerful Sidney Korshak, who, among many distinctions, got macho bully Steve McQueen to cowardly back down when he was trying to strong-arm Evans regarding custody of the latter's son. On one phone call from Mr. Korshak, and guess who backed down? Couldn't have happened to a more deserving tough guy. Put it on your future priority list, won't you? Much obliged, Pally. So it depends on who you talk about when it comes to Bruce Cutler. I first of all, I don't know Bruce Cutler. I know somebody who used Bruce Cutler as an attorney. I've never asked this guy what his opinion was. I would just have to imagine it probably isn't the greatest. But like I said, it depends on who you talk to. Many don't like him. Many have said he couldn't argue his way out of a threesome with midgets. But Cutler's approach to bullying and his tactics worked. But remember, a lot of the glory that Bruce Cutler got was because Gravano was fixing juries. So as good as arguing on Cutler's behalf, was it because Cutler was so good, or was it because Sammy Gravano fixed the trials? I don't know, Bruce, and a lot of people say he's a great guy. But others have other opinions as well. I think it depends on who you are. As far as Frank Gravano goes, he reps some of the biggest names in organized crime, including Jimmy Burke, Santo Trafficante, Jimmy Hoffa, as well as Carlos Marcello. And he was a good lawyer too. But I think the issue with him is that he ends up opening his mouth, alleging that gangsters told him, specifically that Santos Trafficante Jr. told him on his deathbed that they whacked John F. Kennedy. I mean, I honestly don't think Trafficante on his deathbed is going to tell him that. And I think that Frank just assumed. And that would be based on his own role as a go-between Jimmy Hoffa and the Mafia, which he was. Regano was the last person to really see Hoffa alive because he sort of delivered messages back and forth between Hoffa and Florida and others. And really the last thing that's told to Jimmy Hoffa is from Frank Regano, who tells him, you need to be real careful. But he also had an axe to grind. Because he would get in trouble over tax evasion, he would appeal that and win, and then he would lose his law license. And Trafficante, then at that point, would have nothing to do with him. And Regano ends up feeling slighted because he feels like Trafficante should have looked out for him financially. And there was probably a bit of an animosity there, which is probably why he told everybody that Trafficante told him about Kennedy, which I don't believe. Regano would then actually be arrested in 1990 for tax evasion again, and served 10 months in prison. So it's hard to believe some of the things he says only because he would have had a fucking axe to grind. And he wasn't making no money. He had to make money. So there you go. As far as for Sidney Korshak, this was one guy you didn't want to fuck with. He was the ultimate fixer, the go-to guy for problems, specifically with Chicago. Korshak fixed issues for Sinatra, Ronald Reagan, and he controlled what many of the film studios did or didn't do. His real skill set, besides controlling the studios, was controlling labor issues and negotiations between the labor unions and Hollywood assholes. If a Hollywood starlet got knocked up, was on drugs, this was the guy that was brought in to control it. He was probably the most powerful lawyer in the United States during this time period. Never indicted or convicted of anything, even though everybody sort of knew he took part in a massive pump and dump stock scheme where he bought shares at $142 a pop, turns around and sells them for $142,000 a pop and makes $5 million. Guy was a fucking legend and probably, at the end of the day, one of the biggest mob guys, lawyers around, next to Roy Cohn. All right. Last question. Are you a good disco dancer too? Songs like Daddy Cool and shit like that. I don't dance, bottom line. Just dancing's not my thing, except Irish line dancing with my pal down there in South Philly. He's a big Irish line dancer. He keeps threatening he's going to send me videos of him Irish line dancing. The prick. All right, so all that being said, those are going to be all the questions for the Q&A. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to talk about the Bonanno Crime Family. Stay tuned on Mob Talk Radio. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. And what we are talking about now, and the reason why I chose to pick this, was because a lot of people, when we talk about the Bonanno crime family, they've had a lot of problems. And what they were, say, at one point in Joe Bonanno's career, they were one of the top families. And then some stuff happens, and then there's like sort of a domino effect for decades. The family has problems. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about was where these problems began, and then cover all the way through the three Capos murder, because that set the stage for even more problems for the Bonanno crime family. So if you're interested in the Bonanno crime family, this is going to be the show for you. So the Bonanno crime family first begins to have problems in 1956. It really began a little bit before, but 1956 was a big year. As Joe Bonanno's son Salvatore ends up marrying Joe Profaci's daughter Rosalie Profaci. It was a unilateral move. Whether it was love or not really isn't important for what we're discussing. It was largely seen in organized crime circles as a way for Joe Bonanno to bolster his protection, his power, and his rackets. Bonanno had faced some criticism among his peers for not wanting any non-Castellamare Sicilians involved in his crime family. He was old school, and he wanted Sicilians from his own town and nothing else. And that many felt that he was being way too traditional, and that the marriage to the Profaci crime family was seen not just as a power grab, but many felt that if and when Profaci died, the likelihood would be that Joe Bonanno would attempt to secure those rackets under a family umbrella. Bonanno also, wanted and needed somebody to stand by him against Tommy Lucchese and Carlo Gambino. So in 1962, Joe Profaci ends up dying of cancer. Also keep in mind that Joe Bonanno denied ever stabbing Salvatore Maranzano in the back, yet he was given all his rackets the day after his death. So Bonanno on the outside played as if he would have been involved in such a horrible thing, but internally he was 100% involved, because Lucky Luciano never would have let Bonanno live, nor given him Maranzano's rackets. If that were the case. So it's also shortly after that Bonanno begins to spend more and more time in Arizona, and he begins hoarding more and more money, and it creates an issue internally within his own family and amongst his own men, and they sort of feel like they're carrying the family while Bonanno hides out here, hides out there, avoids business here, blah, 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 blah. They felt like they were left in the lurch. So in 1963, Joe Bonanno begins to fear that the power of Carlo Gambino and Tommy Lucchese and those around them was paramount to what he wanted. So in an effort to try and take over, blaming his own family's inner hostilities on Gambino and Lucchese, he launches a plot to kill basically the commission. And at the time, that would have been Carlo Gambino, Carlo Gambino, Tommy Lucchese, his cousin Stefano Magaddino, and Frank DeSimone. Bonanno at the time needs a friend, and he needs somebody very close that he can trust. And he ends up discussing this plan with Joe Magliocco. Magliocco agrees with the idea, not just because of the Profaci and Bonanno families being incredibly tight, but Magliocco was denied a seat on the commission, and it pissed him off. He felt like he should have a seat on the commission. It wasn't given to him, so he gets involved. And in return for his help, he would be second in command of the newly formed commission, which Bonanno wanted to have. The devil is always in the details, and Magliocco was tasked with solving this issue for Bonanno. Magliocco then basically goes to Joe Colombo, who at the time was one of the Profaci crime family's most skillful hit guys. The problem is that Joe Colombo sort of gets cold feet. Killing a boss was one thing, but killing four was something completely different, and I think that Joe Colombo sensed there was more to be gained by sort of telling the commission what was going on, then going through with it, and that's essentially what Joe Colombo does. And so what he ends up doing is he sends word to Carlo Gambino and others about the plans that Bonanno and Magliocco have in store for them. The commission would summon both Magliocco and Bonanno to a meeting to confront both of them over what they've been hearing. Bonanno, fearing for his life, disappears into the Canadian wilderness. Magliocco acts like a fucking man. He goes and he faces the music. At the meeting, they asked for the details about the hit, and the commission agrees that Magliocco probably wasn't the mastermind, that he just went along with it. And as a result of him admitting it, he ends up getting shelved from the mob, removed from the Profaci crime family, and had to pay a $50,000 fine. The family then was taken away from him and handed to Joe Colombo as a reward for his honesty and loyalty to the commission. So Joe Colombo did not earn a crime family in the traditional sense of moving up the ranks. He basically backstabbed somebody, ratted him out, and ends up getting that handed to him. Then on October 21st of 1964, Joe Bonanno returns, showing up in Manhattan, and he was scheduled to undergo grand jury testimony into organized crime, and then he ends up disappearing again for almost 2 years, which not only left his family leaderless, but later he would blame Stefano Magaddino for the bullshit kidnapping. There was no kidnapping. It was just Joe Bonanno's way of blaming other people and not admitting to what was going on. And then in Joe Bonanno's absence, his son, Salvatore Bill Bonanno, ends up trying to take over control of the family. But he was completely inept as a leader, and the commission did not want a Bonanno running that crime family anymore. And so effectively, they end up handing the reins over to Gaspare de Gregorio. And that move ends up creating what we know as the first Bannanas War. The two sides were Gaspar's side and then Salvatore's side. Bonanno, by all accounts, was a huge thorn in the side of the bosses. A lot of people felt like he was handed something he didn't earn. There were other people in line, and it should have been handled differently. So there was a lot of discontent going around. Not only was Joe Bonanno encroaching on territory that wasn't his, but bosses like Frank DeSimone told the commission that he was moving into California, which wasn't his territory. Magaddino would then complain to the commission that Bonanno was encroaching into upstate New York and attempting to bolster into Ontario, Canada. Never mind encroaching, but he was planting flags everywhere and expected everybody else to be okay with it. Bonanno then sends Carmine Galante into Montreal to establish the narcotics trade, refusing to parlay any money back to the five families, which sort of upsets the apple cart. For instance, Joe Bonanno expected and wanted a cut from Las Vegas, and he got it, yet the drug profits he did not want to share. So that just further infuriates the Bonannos, the commission, guys underneath Bonanno, and just the elevation of Salvatore Bill Bonanno in many eyes. Like I said earlier, he didn't earn his wings. He overstepped men that lived and died for his father. And to them, it was just sort of a big, giant slap in the face. Simone Di Cavalcante, who was appointed to go between the commission and Joe Bonanno, becomes completely exacerbated when Bonanno claims, or at least says to him, that he doesn't have to do anything and he doesn't have to talk to the commission. He can do whatever he wants. So then war broke out for 3 years, and both sides trade shots back and forth. During this time, Bonanno is nowhere to be found. On May 17th of 1966, suddenly Joe Bonanno shows up again in Manhattan at Foley Square. He attempts to sort of rally his family back around, and the shooting just continues. Then in 1968, Di Gregorio was wounded by machine gun fire and later would suffer a heart attack, which would leave a void in the crime family. The commission would then back Paul Sciascia. Eventually, Joe Bonanno would only really kind of keep 20 guys with him and sort of begins to see the writing on the wall. The commission allowed him to live, but they banished him from organized crime completely. He was told he was done, he was out, he was fucking shelved. If he was warned, if you ever come back to New York again, or your son does, we are going to fucking kill you. If you get involved in crime again, we are going to kill you. And so basically Joe Bonanno was thrown out of the fucking mafia. Those actions created a lot of backlash against the Bonanno crime family, especially from the other crime families. And I'd agree that because the question will come up is that people will say, well, why would they hold 50 other guys responsible for what one guy did? And I think a lot of that is there was a lot of resentment because of the war. There was a lot of heat that was brought on because of the war. And a lot of people felt that Joe should just go away and stop. He created a lot of fucking problems for people. So should they have held that against everybody else? No, they should have held it just against Joe and not the crime family itself. But as we will see, this is just the beginning of the drama for the Bonanno crime family. So as Sciascia takes over, the family's fractured. His first move was to promote Tommy Evola to underboss and a young earner and tough guy, Rusty Restelli, to consigliere. Restelli had a really good way of controlling the younger guys. A lot of younger guys looked up to him. They needed a young guy to kind of corral the younger guys. The older guys couldn't do that, and that's why Restelli was beneficial to them. Sciascia thought that he could bring the family back to business and regain whatever traction that they might have lost because of Joe Bonanno, and Sciascia would succeed in doing that. Sciascia ends up getting indicted in 1971, and Evola would take over the crime family. Restelli, who would have been second in command, ends up getting indicted for loan sharking and would be found guilty on 7 counts in December of 1972. So in August of 1973, Evola dies, which should, by rightfully so, elevated Rusty Restelli to boss. And then at a commission meeting in 1974, they would end up actually naming Restelli as the new boss of the Bonanno crime family. The problem is that there's a snake waiting in the wings, and that's Carmine Galante. Carmine Galante saw himself as the boss, and he begins to make waves. In 1977, Anthony Spiro, Joey Massino, and Joe Chili Jr. become made members of Cosa Nostra and were inducted by Carmine Galante. In 1976, however, Restelli is once again in prison, and at the time, Galante sort of begins his upswing by going after the Gambinos, killing made guys, and refusing to share in drug profits. On the back end of that, Joey Massino, who supported Restelli all along, begins to talk about the rightful heir to the throne. Restelli sent word to Massino to approach the commission about killing Galante because they have to. If they don't get him out of the way, there's no way that Rusty can fight a war while he's in prison, and he should be the rightful boss. It was a risky move, but by all accord, Restelli was the rightful boss. But because Galante was killing people left and right, the commission was sort of leery about getting involved in the problem. But eventually they do, and Galante's death would be approved. Galante would be killed, and Restelli would officially take over unimpeded in 1979. So in 1981, there would be a few issues. The Bonannos were once again at war, so to speak. There were those who supported Restelli and those who didn't think he should be boss. I think the perception on the street level is that Restelli was behind the wall waging a war, and there would be those on the streets who saw his ascension as invalid and wanted to cash in on pushing him out. It's easier to push a guy out when he's in the can than when he's on the street. So we have what we call the 3 Capo hit. Sonny Red and Delicato didn't support Restelli as boss, not at all. He saw an opportunity and he wanted it. Joe Massino at the time was jockeying for position as well. I think at the time Joey Massino figured, I can take over the crime family. I'll support Rusty. Let's figure out how we're going to do this. But I think ultimately Massino was 5 steps ahead of fucking everybody involved. And as a result of the differences in opinions, the Bonannos end up splintering. On one side, you have Restelli, Massino, and Sonny Black Napolitano. On the other side, you have Sonny Red and Delicato, Dominic Trinchera, and Philip Giacone, who Massino had actually worked for. He was in the Giacone's crew, so to speak. Restelli begins hearing that there's a rival group, and he orders that the 3 Capos are to be killed. The commission was informed of the problems, and they were trying to really stay out of it, but eventually the dam breaks, and that would be the end of it. Massino had heard whispers that in Delicato, Trinchera, and company were planning on killing them. Massino knew with the information that he had to have permission from the commission to kill them. And so what Massino does is he has a meeting with Carmine Persico, lays it out. Persico says, okay, well, you need to go talk to Big Paulie, Paul Castellano, and if he's okay with it, I'm okay with it. And basically, Paul Castellano tells Joey Massino that this is a serious fucking problem and you should act immediately. And without getting their approval, Massino probably would have been killed for killing them. So he gets the sanction of the commission to do it. Now, what people are probably going to ask is why Paul would even get involved in that. And I think personally, from the perspective, first of all, Paul had to have known the murder of these 3 guys was going to create a lot of heat. But I also think that Paul was smart enough to realize that let them go and do this. They're our competition. They fucked this up. They're all going to go away. It's not going to be my problem. And so I think from the perspective of you have to act, I think first of all, excuse me, I think he had a lot of respect for Joey Massino. I think he had respect for Rastelli, and I think that he went along with it because I think that, he's thinking out of the box of, well, if somebody tried to do this to me, this is what I would do. Too bad he didn't think that way not 8 years fucking later when he gets hit. But this is why he allows it. And so basically Massino meets with Sonny Black and Jolando Shasha, who at the time was a captain, and he had ties within the Rizzuto crime family. So they send word to Indelicato, Trinchera, and everybody else that there's going to be a meeting in Brooklyn to absolve the issues. We're going to come to an understanding, and everything's going to be great. I don't know why they fell for this, but they did. Massino then brings in Sal Vitale, Vito Rizzuto to help with the hit. So basically, come meeting time, Frank Lino ends up bringing in the guys, Trinchera, Indelicato, and Giacone, and all three are shot to death almost immediately, and Lino would escape only because they missed shooting him. They shot, they missed, and later on he would end up sitting down with Joey Massino and they would come to an agreement, and so that was there. We talk about the Bonannos having problems all the time, and further past, when you move past the three Capos hit, it just gets worse. Specifically, Joe Pistone, also known as Donnie Brasco. Then you got Sal Vitale, and then Joey Massino becomes a rat. The downward spiral to this begins in the 1950s, and it's just now seeming to sort of fucking kind of right itself. The Bonannos, it's one of these things where it started in the 50s and it still goes on today. The Bonannos have had horrible bad luck. The reason why they lost the commission seat was because of the Donnie Brasco incident. Why there weren't 25 or 30 guys killed for that kind of shit, I'll never understand, but that is a thing. And so someone may say, so were the Bonannos better off as Joe Bonanno was boss than the other guys? Well, honestly, yes, because despite my trappings and my musings or my issues with some of the things that Joe Bonanno did, he wasn't a fucking certifiable rat. He didn't testify against everybody. He did write a fucking stupid book, which was filled with lies and delusions and grandeur. But it was a very contentious time within the Bonanno crime family, and I don't know if they've truly ever recovered. I mean, now they're starting to make headways again, but I don't think they ever really truly fucking recovered from that. And how do you? And how do you recover from that? It's one thing if you have a boss that's greedy, who punches the fucking quarter till the eagle screams. It's another if you have a boss who isn't around the whole lot and puts his son at the top of the fucking food chain. There is a difference between that and bringing in a fucking FBI agent into your crime family. That is a big fucking problem. Sonny Black paid for that. A whole bunch of other people paid for that. But this is where the problems began. Now, if we go back in time and we say we want to change it, maybe there could have been some other things that were done. But this is like 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, this is like just nonstop. And the Bonannos constantly have a rat problem. And so I think, and I can say this now without any equivocation, I think the people that are in control of the Bonanno crime family now are a little different. I think they're a little wiser. I think they've learned from the past. But everybody always wants to know why the Bonannos get knocked and why people put them at the bottom of the chain. And that's why. And that's exactly why, because of history. Now, granted, you can't blame the current guys for past guys' sort of mistakes, but it just leaves a dark cloud. It always has, it always will, because you're never going to live down the Donnie Brasco bullshit. And it's just, it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it. And I think that's why they lost a commission seat. That's exactly why. A lot of people ask me all the time. There was an instant where Joey Massino wanted to change the name from the Bonanno crime family to the Massino crime family. And he went to John Gotti to help John Gotti parlay that to other bosses. And they said, absolutely not. And can you imagine if they had done that, if they had changed the name from Bonanno to the Massino crime family, then he turns into a fucking rat. So then you'd have a crime family named after a rat. And by many accounts, I know a lot of people that knew Joey Massino and said he was a very tough guy. He was a fucking wickedly fucking smart guy. Very, very fucking intelligent, very deadly, but he ends up going the route he did. And I don't think, historically speaking, I mean, obviously, these days, ratting seems to be the thing to go to. But I think a lot of people that were stunned by Joey Massino becoming a rat. If he kills Sal Vitale, he probably doesn't have that problem. But then again, I don't know what his motivation was. I don't understand why, other than the fact that he didn't want to go to prison. I get that. But it's very interesting to me historically when you look at somebody who is, heads to toes, goes from the bottom to the top, and then just starts talking and squealing. I just don't understand it. Because by all accounts, from people that knew him, Joey Massino was not the kind of guy that would ever talk, but ultimately he does. And so this is why the Bonanno crime family doesn't get probably the proper respect that they deserve. It's because of all these little asterisks next to historical things that have happened. I think Joe Bonanno could have done things very, very differently. I think that if Joe Bonanno does not take this stance of wanting to whack out the commission, wanting to kill Carlo Gambino and Frank DeSimone, and Tommy Lucchese and Stefano Magaddino, if Bonanno doesn't do that, Bonanno lives he lived to like he was fucking, what was he, 90? Was he 100? Somebody will tell me how old he was. I know he was got to be like 101, 102 when he died. Or maybe late 90s, still a boss. Can you imagine? And that's the fucking weird thing about this, is that fucking if he had just followed the fucking rules and stayed out of nonsense, he would have seen Gambino die, he would have seen all his enemies die, and he would have been the fucking man. Imagine that. Imagine if he didn't do what he did and he outlived them fucking all. There's some glory in that, no doubt. If he had just shut the fuck up and just kept it moving, he would have outlived every single one of them, and he would have gotten exactly what he wanted, and he would have been the stereotypical boss of bosses. Absolutely 100%, because he outlived them all. But that's not the way things went, and so that's pretty much where the Bonanno bullshit comes from, where the drama comes from. That's where they get the no respect. They do get respect today, don't get me wrong, but there's always that kind of, the past bullshit. And that's always going to haunt that crime family. It always will. And if and I'm not saying there's more rats in this family than the other family, but as long as it continues the same kind of direction, I mean, I just don't see how they can just rebound, but that's just, I don't know. That's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. And a lot of people have asked, why they're not held up to the standards or to the same level as the Genovese or the Gambino crime family, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why. That's exactly why. And so I'm glad I got an opportunity to talk about that, because we've done so many shows where I just didn't specifically hone in on this is the reason why. And that is the reason why. 100%. So all that being said, we will be back next week with a biography, another Q&A, and some interesting stuff. And just in final, I didn't know this. I learned this the other day. Jim Belushi's father was a restaurateur. His uncle was a barber. And he recently told a story that his great uncle used to cut Al Capone's hair, which I thought was really cool. But he tells another story that his father had worked in, and obviously Jim Belushi's Albanian, that his father, owned a very, very good restaurant, and the Mafia continued to shake his father down, ultimately to the point where his father just gave him the business and walked away. And he told a very interesting story how his father was never the same after that. His father had worked hard his whole life to run a legit business, a good restaurant, and mob guys came in, shook him down, and he could have probably gone and gotten some help, but he didn't. He just gave him the business, and Jim Belushi said that his father was never the same. It was always depressed after that, never recovered from it. And if you want to hear that story, it's a very small story. It's on Jim Belushi's new show. Obviously, Jim Belushi is selling pot now, growing pot out in Oregon. I forgot the name of the show, but there's some excerpts on YouTube because he ends up going to Colombia looking for a strain of Colombian marijuana. and he ends up like visiting where Pablo Escobar was, where he lived. He ends up visiting the zoo and some other things, the prison that Pablo Escobar built. And it's an interesting way because he said that he was always enamored with Pablo Escobar, always curious, kind of like, yeah, it's like the forbidden fruit. You like to dig into things that are seedy and dangerous and criminal, but he ends up coming to the realization that it was likely cocaine that Pablo Escobar provided that killed his brother John. And so it's a very interesting sort of way of looking at it. But basically, it's a reality show that Jimmy does, and it's about, harvesting marijuana, growing marijuana. Dan Aykroyd's in it, and a couple other people. But it's an interesting reality show. It's probably a little too scripted for my tastes, but it was very interesting to hear him tell the story about the mob in Chicago and just his father's business. And it sucks. I mean, I think it's shitty that his father lost his business. But, the reality is business is business. And maybe his father could have fought back against that by knowing somebody. But, I'm sure there's more to that story. But that's really the only brief thing he really said about it. So all that being said, we will be back next week with an all new show, all new content, and a little more information about the new platform. So all that being said, have a great week, and we will see you next week on Mob Talk Radio.